The day I was sold like cattle to pay a dead man's debt, I learned what it meant to be worthless. But the day a duke walked into my husband's manor and offered to buy me back, that's when I discovered something far more dangerous than being unwanted. I discovered what it felt like to matter. My name is Elara Whitmore, and this is the story of how I went from being the bride no one wanted to the woman who brought a cruel nobleman to his knees. If you want to see how far a broken girl can rise, stay until the end. Drop a like, tell me what city you're watching from, and let's begin. The rain came down in sheets the morning Elara Whitmore turned 18, just as it had the day they buried her father a year before. She stood at the narrow window of her chamber, though calling it her chamber felt like a lie. Watching water streak down the glass like tears, she no longer had the strength to cry. Behind her, the door opened without a knock. It never did anymore. "You're wanted downstairs." The voice belonged to Mrs. Kelleen, the head housekeeper, whose tone had transformed from polite indifference to barely concealed contempt over the past 12 months. Elara didn't turn around. She'd learned that showing emotion only invited more cruelty. "When?" she asked quietly. "Now. Lord Hale has company." Elara's stomach tightened. Victor never summoned her when he had guests. For the past year, she'd been kept carefully hidden, like a shameful secret, like evidence of a mistake he wished he could erase. Their marriage existed only on paper, a transaction completed in a candlelit study with her mother sobbing in the corner and Victor's cold eyes promising nothing but obligation. She smoothed down her dress, gray wool, plain and severe, the kind of thing a governess might wear, or a servant. Victor had made it clear that she was permitted no colors, no jewelry, nothing that might suggest she held any position of importance in his household. The other servants wore livery more elegant than her daily clothes. "Did he say why?" Elara asked, though she already knew the question was pointless. Mrs. Kellen's lips twisted into something that might have been a smile on a kinder face. "His lordship doesn't explain himself to me, and he certainly won't explain himself to you." The words landed like small stones meant to wound. Elara absorbed them the way she'd absorbed a year's worth of casual cruelties. The servants who forgot to bring her dinner, the maids who whispered just loud enough for her to hear, the complete and total erasure of her existence within these walls. She followed Mrs. Kellen down the grand staircase, her hand barely touching the polished mahogany banister. This house, Thornfield Manor, was beautiful in the way a mausoleum was beautiful. Cold, perfect, dead. Oil paintings of Victor's ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her descent with aristocratic disdain. None of them, she noticed, seemed particularly happy. Perhaps cruelty was hereditary. The murmur of voices grew louder as they approached the drawing room. Male voices, and something else, a woman's laugh, light and musical, the kind of sound that had been absent from these halls since Elara arrived. "Mrs." Kellen pushed open the door without announcing her, then stepped aside with an expression of dark satisfaction. The scene inside made Elara's breath catch. Victor stood by the fireplace in his finest coat, his dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so consistently cruel. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, close enough that her skirts brushed his legs, stood the most beautiful woman Elara had ever seen. She was perhaps 25, with golden hair piled in elaborate curls and a dress of deep emerald silk that must have cost more than Elara's father had earned in a year. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but it was her expression that cut the deepest, the way she looked at Victor with open adoration, the way his hand rested possessively on her waist, the complete comfort between them that spoke of intimacy far beyond friendship. "Ah," Victor said, his voice flat. "There you are." He didn't introduce her, didn't explain why she'd been summoned, simply gestured vaguely in her direction as if she were a piece of furniture he was pointing out. "This is the girl," he said to the woman, "the one I told you about." The woman's eyes swept over Elara with the kind of assessment one might give a horse at market. "Oh," she said, and her voice dripped with honeyed pity. "The poor thing. She's even more pathetic than you described, darling." Darling. The word hung in the air like poison. Elara's hands clenched in her skirts. She'd known, of course. The servants talked. Victor disappeared for days at a time, returning with the smell of expensive perfume, clinging to his clothes. but having the truth presented so openly, so carelessly, felt like being slapped. Lady Celine will be staying with us, Victor announced, turning back to stroke the woman's cheek with a tenderness he'd never once shown his wife. I've had the rose suite prepared for her, the one next to my chambers. The message was crystal clear. Lady Celine Marrow, because of course her name was Celine, beautiful and otherworldly, would occupy the finest rooms in the house. She would sleep mere feet from Victor's bed, perhaps in it, while Elara remained banished to the servants' wing, where even the maids had better accommodations. "How lovely," Elara heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected from her body. "Will you require anything else, my lord?" Victor's eyes narrowed. He hated when she used his title with that particular inflection, respectful on the surface, hollow underneath. It reminded him that their marriage, loveless as it was, still legally bound them. "Yes," he said coldly. "You will take your meals in your room from now on. Lady Celine shouldn't have to endure awkward encounters at breakfast." Something in Elara's chest, something that had been cracking slowly for months, finally broke. Not with drama or tears, but with a quiet, terrible certainty. She had tried. For a year, she had tried to be invisible, to be acceptable, to somehow earn the basic human decency of being acknowledged as a person rather than a burden. It would never be enough. "As you wish," she whispered. "Oh, Victor," Celine laughed, pressing herself against him. "You're so harsh. Look at her. She's practically trembling. One might almost feel sorry for her if she weren't so very drab." The servants lining the walls, because of course Victor had made sure there was an audience, didn't even try to hide their smirks. This was entertainment. The humiliation of their master's unwanted wife was a show they'd all paid to see. Elara turned to leave, focusing on keeping her steps steady, her spine straight. She would not run. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Oh, and Elara?" Victor's voice stopped her at the door. She looked back, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. They were the color of slate, flat and pitiless. "Try not to linger in the corridors. Celine finds your presence unsettling." The servants didn't laugh. That would have been too crude. But their silence was worse, heavy with shared contempt. Elara nodded once and walked out. She made it to the main hall before she heard the carriages. 2 of them, approaching fast despite the rain. The sound of horses' hooves on gravel, the jingle of harnesses, the shout of drivers. Unexpected visitors were rare at Thornfield. Victor preferred his cruelties private. Elara paused at the window, watching as the first carriage, Victor's own, she realized with a spike of confusion, pulled to a stop. The driver jumped down, moving with unusual urgency to open the door. Lady Celine emerged first, laughing as a footman helped her navigate the wet steps. Then Victor himself, looking pleased in a way Elara rarely saw. They'd clearly been out together, she realized. Perhaps he'd taken Celine shopping in town, buying her trinkets and treasures while his wife wore year-old dresses with fraying hems. But it was the second carriage that made Elara's breath stop. It was black as midnight, pulled by 4 horses that looked like they'd been carved from shadow. No family crest marked the door, but everything about it screamed power and wealth that made even Victor's obvious prosperity look shabby by comparison. The driver wore livery of deep charcoal, and when he opened the door, he bowed so low it was nearly a genuflection. A man stepped out. Even through the rain-streaked window, Elara could see he was tall, taller than Victor, broader in the shoulders. His coat was expertly tailored, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the mud. But it was the way he moved that caught her attention. Controlled, deliberate, like a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was and saw no need to prove it. He looked up at the manor, and for just a moment his eyes seemed to find Elara's window. She stepped back instinctively, her heart hammering. Victor had frozen on the steps, all his earlier satisfaction draining from his face. He looked, Elara realized with shock, afraid. "Your Grace," Victor stammered, and even from inside Elara could hear the panic in his voice. We weren't expecting you. If you'd sent word, were you not?" The stranger's voice carried clearly through the rain. It was deep, cultured, and absolutely cold. "How curious. I sent 3 letters requesting an audience. Perhaps they went astray." Victor's face flushed. Your Grace, I can explain. Can you? The man, Your Grace, a duke then, began walking toward the entrance. I look forward to it. Shall we speak inside, Lord Hale? Or would you prefer to discuss your debts in front of your servants? The word debts fell like a thunderclap. Elara watched Victor's face cycle through emotions: fear, anger, desperation. Beside him, Celine had gone very still, her earlier playfulness evaporating. Of course, Your Grace. Please, come in. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. I'm sure it's not. The Duke mounted the steps with the same measured precision and disappeared from Elara's view as he entered the manor. She heard the commotion below, servants scrambling, Mrs. Kelling's sharp orders, Victor's voice pitched high with false cheerfulness as he tried to play the gracious host. She should go to her room. This wasn't her business. Nothing in this house was her business, but something made her stay. Some instinct, some whisper of change in the air. Footsteps approached rapidly, Mrs. Kelling, most likely, coming to make sure Elara wasn't where she shouldn't be. Elara ducked into a small alcove, pressing herself against the wall behind a potted fern. Childish, perhaps. But she'd learned that invisibility was survival. Voices drifted up from the entrance hall. Completely unexpected, Your Grace. Had I known you were coming? Victor, trying to regain control of the situation. You would have what? Hidden the evidence more carefully? The Duke's voice was arctic. I've spent 6 months examining your financial records, Lord Hale. The paper trail is quite illuminating. I don't know what you think you've found, but I assure you, shall I list them? The Duke's footsteps echoed on marble. He was moving, Elara realized, coming upstairs. The falsified contracts with Whitmore Trading, the debts you artificially inflated, the property you claimed as collateral that never belonged to the deceased in the first place. Should I continue? Elara's heart stopped. Whitmore Trading. Her father's company. Your Grace, please. Victor sounded desperate now. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Oh, we will. But first, I want to see exactly what you gained from your schemes. They were on the stairs now. Elara could see them through the carved banister, Victor pale and sweating, Celine trailing behind with wide eyes, and the Duke. Elara finally got a clear look at him. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and features that were more striking than handsome, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes so dark they were nearly black. But it was his expression that made her breath catch. Controlled fury, ice-cold intelligence, and something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. The girl, the Duke said flatly. Where is she? I don't understand. Elara Whitmore, your wife, the daughter of the man you destroyed. Where is she? Elara's fingers dug into the wall. He knew. The stranger knew about her. Victor's jaw worked. She's indisposed. Find her. It wasn't a request. The Duke's voice held the kind of authority that came from generations of power, from a position so far above Victor's that refusal was unthinkable. Your Grace, I really don't see what my wife has to do with everything. The Duke turned to face Victor fully, and even from her hiding spot, Elara could see Victor take an involuntary step backward. She has everything to do with this. Now find her, or I will search this manor room by room until I do. Mrs. Kelling appeared, flustered and afraid. My lord, the girl is here! Elara stepped out from behind the fern. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them hidden in her skirts. Every eye turned to her, Victor's furious, Celine's contemptuous, Mrs. Kelling shocked. But it was the Duke's expression that made her lift her chin. He was looking at her the way Victor never had. Like she was real, like she was a person who mattered. Elara Whitmore, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, she managed. And you are? Duke Adrian Blackthorne. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that felt surreal in this house where she was treated like furniture. I've been looking for you. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Adrian's eyes moved deliberately to Victor, then back to her. Because a debt is owed, and I've come to collect it. Victor's face went from pale to crimson. Your Grace, whatever you think you know, I know everything. Adrian's voice could have frozen fire. I know that Thomas Whitmore borrowed £10,000 from you to save his shipping business. I know that you altered the contract after his death, inflating the amount to $30,000. I know that when his daughter couldn't pay, you offered an alternative arrangement. His eyes cut to Elara. Marriage, to settle a debt that never existed in the first place. The hall had gone absolutely silent. Even Celine had stopped pretending to arrange her skirts. Elara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. That's not... My mother said the debts were real. She said father had borrowed... Your father borrowed exactly what the original contract stated, Adrian interrupted gently, and he'd paid back nearly half before his death. Lord Hale forged the rest. You can't prove that, Victor's voice cracked. You have no evidence. I have the original contract. I have testimony from the clerks you bribed to alter the records. I have bank statements showing your actual expenditures versus the amounts you claimed. Adrian pulled a leather folder from his coat. I have everything, Lord Hale. The only question is how you'd prefer this to proceed. Victor's face had gone through red and was approaching purple. This is slander. You'll have me what? Adrian's voice dropped to something dangerous. Take me to court? Please do. I would enjoy watching you explain these documents to a magistrate. The silence that followed was deafening. Elara's mind was reeling. A year. She'd spent a year believing her father had left her family destitute, that this marriage was the only way to save her mother and siblings from poverty, and it had all been a lie, a carefully constructed trap designed to what? Give Victor a wife he didn't want? Why? She asked, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Why would you do this? For the first time, Victor looked at her with something other than contempt. He looked cornered. You don't understand. Then explain it. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Months of swallowed rage, swallowed hurt, swallowed humiliation suddenly pushing against her ribs. Explain why you destroyed my father's reputation. Explain why you forced me into this marriage. Explain why you've spent a year making sure I know exactly how much you despise my existence. Explain it, Victor. Don't you dare take that tone with me. Answer her. Adrian's voice cut through Victor's bluster like a blade. I'd like to hear this as well. Victor's mouth opened and closed. Celine had pressed herself against the wall, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. The servants were frozen in place, barely breathing. It was business, Victor finally spat. Your father's company had shipping contracts I needed. When he refused to sell, I found another way. You destroyed him. Elara's voice was shaking now. You ruined his name, drove him to an early grave, and then trapped me to, what? Punish him further? Make sure his family suffered even after his death? I gave you a home. You gave me a prison. The words exploded out of her. You've spent a year making sure I know I'm nothing, that I'm unwanted, that I'm a mistake you wish you could erase. And now she's here, Elara gestured to Celine, who flinched, to make absolutely certain I understand that I will never, ever be anything more than a name on a worthless contract. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Adrian spoke, and his voice was soft but somehow more terrifying than any shout. I see. He turned to Victor with an expression that made the nobleman take an involuntary step backward. You owe me £60,000, Lord Hale. Due immediately. Victor's face went white. I don't have... That's impossible. Then we have a problem. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. You've spent the past 3 years borrowing extensively against future earnings, shipping investments that failed, mining operations that collapsed. A gambling habit you think no one knows about. Each word landed like a physical blow. You're drowning in debt, and you've been using your wife's father's falsified obligations to keep your creditors at bay. You can't call in those debts, Victor whispered. I need time. You've had time. 3 years of it. I'm done waiting. I'll lose everything. Victor's voice broke. The manor, the lands, my title's reputation? Yes. Adrian's expression didn't change. You will. Elara watched this exchange feeling like she'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. This duke, this stranger, was systematically destroying Victor's entire world with the same casual precision one might use to solve a mathematics problem. Unless, Adrian continued quietly. You're willing to negotiate. Victor grabbed onto the word like a drowning man. Yes, yes, of course. Name your terms, Your Grace. Anything. I want her. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elara's heart stopped. Victor's eyes widened. Celine gasped. What? Victor stammered. Adrian's eyes moved to Elara, and for the first time she saw something almost gentle in them. An annulment. You release Elara from this fraudulent marriage immediately and without contest. In exchange, I'll erase your debts to me. That's... Victor's mouth worked soundlessly. That's 60,000 pounds for a... Choose your next words very carefully, Adrian said softly, and something in his tone made Victor's jaw snap shut. The nobleman's eyes darted between Elara and the Duke, calculating. Why would you possibly want her? She's nothing. She has nothing. That's not your concern. Do you accept my terms or not? Elara found her voice. I haven't agreed to this. Both men turned to look at her. She felt her face flush but forced herself to continue. You're negotiating my life like I'm a horse you're trading. I haven't agreed to anything. Adrian's expression shifted, something like approval flickering across his features. You're absolutely right. My apologies, Miss Whitmore. He turned fully to face her, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. I'm offering you a choice. Come with me. Let me help you dissolve this marriage, and I'll make sure Victor never has power over you again. Or stay here, and I'll find another way to make him pay. The decision is entirely yours. It was the first time in a year anyone had asked Elara what she wanted. She looked at Victor, at his face twisted with desperation and barely suppressed rage, at Celine watching with wide, frightened eyes, at the servants lining the walls, some of them looking almost disappointed that the show might be ending. Then she looked at Adrian Blackthorne, this stranger who had appeared like a storm and turned her world inside out. If I go with you, she said slowly, what happens to me? You'll stay at my estate as my ward until the annulment is complete. You'll be provided for, protected, and when the marriage is dissolved, you'll be free to make your own choices. I'll ensure you have the means to support yourself, whether that's returning to your family or establishing yourself independently. And what do you gain from this? A flash of something, pain, regret, crossed his face so quickly she almost missed it. The satisfaction of a debt repaid. Your father once showed me kindness when I was young and stupid and too arrogant to deserve it. I've been looking for a way to return that favor. This is it. Elara studied his face, looking for deception, but his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, held nothing but honest conviction. She thought of her father, who'd died believing he'd failed his family, of her mother, who'd wept as she handed Elara over to Victor, of the year she'd spent as a ghost in this beautiful, terrible house. I'll go, she said quietly. Elara, you can't seriously... Victor started. I'll go, she repeated, louder this time. I'll do whatever needs to be done to end this marriage. And Victor? She met her husband's eyes. I hope I never see you again. Victor's face mottled with rage. You ungrateful. After everything I've done for you, everything you've done to her, Adrian corrected coldly. We're done here. Miss Whitmore, do you need to collect your belongings? Elara thought of her room, the narrow bed, the few worn dresses, the complete absence of anything that felt like hers. No, there's nothing I want from this house. Adrian nodded once, then turned to Victor. I'll send the annulment papers within the week. Sign them, or I'll proceed with legal action that will make these debts look like a kindness. Are we clear? Victor said nothing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I said, are we clear? Yes, Victor bit out. Your Grace. Excellent. Adrian offered his arm to Elara. Shall we? She took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with anything approaching gentleness that she had to blink back sudden tears. They descended the stairs together. Behind them, Elara could hear Celine's whispered questions and Victor's harsh responses. The servants parted like water, their faces showing everything from shock to speculation to something that might have been envy. Mrs. Kelleen appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face twisted with disapproval. My lord, surely you can't allow... Mrs. Kellen, Elara said quietly, stopping. You've spent a year making my life here as miserable as possible. I hope you enjoyed it. It's the last power you'll ever have over me." The housekeeper's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Outside, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Adrian's carriage waited, its dark horses shifting impatiently. A footman appeared with an umbrella, sheltering Elara as Adrian handed her up into the plush interior. The seats were upholstered in midnight blue velvet. The air smelled of leather and something else. Cedar, maybe. Everything about it spoke of wealth so far beyond Victor's pretensions that it was almost laughable. Adrian settled across from her and rapped on the ceiling. The carriage lurched into motion. Through the window, Elara watched Thornfield Manor recede into the rain-soaked landscape. Victor stood in the doorway, a dark figure framed by light, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked quietly. Elara realized she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I am." Adrian produced a handkerchief, real linen, monogrammed, and handed it to her without comment. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sound the drumming of rain on the carriage roof and the rhythmic clatter of hooves. Finally, Elara found her voice. "Why?" "I told you." "No." She looked up at him, this stranger who had destroyed her husband's world and offered her freedom in the same breath. "Why, really? People don't do things like this, not without reason." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. 15 years ago, I was 17 years old and convinced I knew everything. I'd come into my title young, and I used it like a weapon. I was cruel to people who didn't deserve it, arrogant to those who tried to help me, and completely certain that power meant I was right. He looked out the window at the passing countryside. "Your father caught me cheating one of his clerks, shorting the man's wages and threatening to have him dismissed if he complained. Thomas Whitmore had no reason to intervene. I was a duke. I could have destroyed his business with a word, but he pulled me aside and spoke to me like I was a person, not a title. He told me that power without honor was just tyranny in fancy clothes. And then he paid his clerk the full wages I'd stolen out of his own pocket and never said a word about it to anyone." Elara felt fresh tears burning. That sounded like her father. "When I heard about the debts, about the marriage, I started investigating. It took months to uncover what Victor had done, but once I had proof..." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to let your father's kindness be repaid with cruelty. Not if I could prevent it." "So this is about guilt," Elara said softly. "No." Adrian met her eyes. "This is about justice. And maybe about making sure at least one good man's legacy isn't buried under lies." The carriage crested a hill, and through the rain, Elara saw it. A sprawling estate that made Thornfield look like a cottage. Gray stone walls, towers reaching toward stormy skies, windows that glowed with warm light. Ravenhurst, she assumed. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Adrian said quietly, "you rest, you heal, and when you're ready, we make Victor pay for what he did to your family." Elara looked down at the crumpled handkerchief in her hands, then back up at the man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. "I want to be there," she said. "When you confront him, when you expose what he did, I want to watch him answer for it." Something fierce and approving flickered across Adrian's face. "Then you will be." The carriage pulled through massive iron gates, and Elara Whitmore, no longer anyone's unwanted bride, no longer anyone's burden, felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. She felt the first stirrings of hope, and beneath it, buried deep but growing stronger, something else entirely, the desire for revenge. The first night at Ravenhurst, Elara didn't sleep. She lay in a bedroom 3 times the size of her chamber at Thornfield, staring at ceiling frescoes painted by masters whose names she'd only read in books. The bed was so soft it felt like floating. The fire in the hearth crackled with expensive wood that smelled of apple and oak. Everything about the room whispered luxury, comfort, safety. And yet she couldn't close her eyes, because every time she did, she saw Victor's face, the rage in his eyes when she'd walked away, the calculation. Men like Victor didn't accept defeat. They plotted revenge. And she was no longer under his roof, no longer bound by the terrible security of knowing exactly how bad things would be. Now she was adrift in unknown waters, dependent on a stranger's promise. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Whitmore?" A woman's voice, gentle and unfamiliar. "May I come in?" Elara sat up, pulling the borrowed nightgown, silk, impossibly fine, higher around her shoulders. "Yes?" The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 50s, dressed in a housekeeper's black, but with none of Mrs. Kellen's harsh severity. Her face was round and kind, her eyes the color of warm chocolate. "I'm Mrs. Whitfield, the head housekeeper. His Grace asked me to check on you." She carried a tray with tea and small cakes. "I saw the light under your door and thought you might appreciate some chamomile." "That's very kind," Elara's voice came out hoarse. "But I'm fine, truly." Mrs. Whitfield set the tray down and gave Elara a look that suggested she'd heard that particular lie before. "If I may be frank, miss, you have the eyes of someone who's been holding herself together with wire and prayer. The Duke said you'd likely try to be no trouble at all, which is exactly why I should trouble you with some tea and company, if you'll permit it." Despite everything, Elara felt her lips twitch towards something almost like a smile. "Does everyone here speak their mind so freely?" "His Grace prefers honesty to flattery, makes for an unusual household, but a peaceful one." Mrs. Whitfield poured the tea with practiced efficiency. "Now then, tomorrow you'll meet the rest of the staff, but tonight you need only know this. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, whatever you're afraid might happen next, you're safe at Ravenhurst." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Elara's throat tight with tears she refused to shed. "Why is he doing this, the Duke? What does he really want from me?" Mrs. Whitfield's expression softened. "The same thing he's wanted since his father died and left him a title at 16, to do better than the men who came before him. Your father showed him kindness when kindness was rare. His Grace doesn't forget debts, miss. Good ones or bad." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Drink your tea, try to rest, and in the morning the world will look less frightening in daylight." After she left, Elara did drink the tea. It tasted of flowers and honey, and for the first time in months the knot in her stomach loosened slightly. She was still awake when dawn broke over Ravenhurst towers, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. But somewhere in those quiet hours she'd made a decision. If Adrian Blackthorne was offering her a chance to fight back, she would take it, but she would do it on her own terms. Morning came with another knock, this one brisker. A young maid entered, her arms laden with dresses. "His Grace's sister sent these, miss. Lady Lydia said you're near the same size, and she has more gowns than any reasonable person needs." The maid's eyes were bright with curiosity, but not unkind. "I'm Anne, miss. I'll be helping you while you're here." The dresses were beautiful. Day gowns in blues and greens and soft grays, nothing like the drab sack Victor had permitted her. Elara ran her fingers over the fabric, quality she'd almost forgotten existed. "His Grace requests your presence at breakfast," Anne continued, laying out a dress of deep forest green. "If you're feeling well enough, of course." Elara straightened her spine. "I'm well enough." The breakfast room was smaller than she'd expected, flooded with morning light from tall windows overlooking formal gardens. Adrian sat at the head of a long table, reading correspondence, a cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up when she entered and stood immediately. "Miss Whitmore, I hope you rested well." "Well enough, Your Grace." The lie came easily. "Thank you for the room, and the clothes." "My sister's doing, not mine. She'll be joining us shortly. Fair warning, Lydia is enthusiastic about everything and has no sense of appropriate boundaries." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Help yourself to whatever you'd like." The sideboard was laden with more food than Elara had seen in a year. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, jam, fruit, pastries. Her stomach growled traitorously. She took small portions of everything, hyper-aware of Adrian's presence. He'd returned to his letters, giving her space, but she could feel his attention like a physical weight. "I have questions," she said finally. Adrian set down his correspondence. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." "The annulment, how long will it take?" "Weeks, possibly months. We'll need to prove the marriage was contracted under fraudulent circumstances. I have lawyers who specialize in precisely this sort of thing, but these matters require documentation and testimony." He paused. "Victor will fight it. Men like him always do." "I expected that." Elara met his eyes. "What I didn't expect was your intervention. You said my father showed you kindness, but 15 years is a long time to remember a single conversation." "It wasn't a single conversation." Adrian's voice went quiet. "After that first time, your father made a point of checking on me. Nothing obvious. He'd arrange business meetings at his office, ask my opinion on shipping routes, treat me like I was worth more than my title. He did it for 2 years, until I was old enough to understand what he was really doing." "Which was?" "Teaching me that power is a responsibility, not a right." Adrian's jaw tightened. "When I heard about his death, about the debts, I started investigating immediately, but I was too slow. By the time I had proof of Victor's fraud, you were already married. I've spent the past year building an airtight case to free you from it." The door burst open before Elara could respond. "Finally!" A young woman swept in like a force of nature, petite, dark-haired, eyes the same intense shade as Adrian's. She couldn't have been more than 20. "Adrian, you absolute monster, you didn't wake me. I wanted to be here when she arrived last night, but someone," she shot her brother a glare, "said I should let you rest. Miss Whitmore, I'm Lydia, and I am so pleased you're here. This house has been unbearably dull." "Lydia," Adrian began. "Don't Lydia me. I'm being welcoming." She claimed the chair beside Elara with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she wasn't wanted anywhere. "Those are my dresses, by the way. The green suits you better than it ever did me. You should keep it." "I couldn't possibly." "You absolutely can. I have 17 day dresses, and that's not counting evening gowns. It's obscene." Lydia loaded her plate with an impressive amount of food. "Besides, Adrian told me what happened at Thornfield. Lord Hale sounds perfectly vile, and his mistress sounds worse. You'll stay here as long as you need, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me." Despite herself, Elara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to be absolutely shameless about recruiting you for my causes. Do you ride? Please say you ride. Adrian refuses to go on morning rides with me anymore because I chatter too much, which is ridiculous. How else are we supposed to have conversations?" "Lydia," Adrian said with the long-suffering tone of an older brother, "perhaps let Miss Whitmore eat her breakfast before you plan her entire schedule." "I'm being efficient." But Lydia subsided, focusing on her eggs with exaggerated innocence. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of Lydia's enthusiastic commentary and Adrian's dry interjections. It felt surreal, this casual warmth, this easy banter. At Thornfield, meals had been silent, tense affairs on the rare occasions Victor allowed her to eat with the household. After breakfast, Adrian excused himself to meet with his solicitors. Lydia immediately linked her arm through Elara's. "Let me show you the grounds. They're quite lovely if you ignore the East Wing, which is falling apart because our grandfather was more interested in collecting rare books than maintaining the roof." They walked through gardens that put Thornfields to shame, past fountains and hedge mazes, and a small lake where swans glided serenely. Lydia kept up a running commentary, but beneath the cheerfulness, Elara sensed a sharp intelligence. "My brother is terrible at explaining things," Lydia said as they paused by the lake. "He probably told you facts and figures about the annulment, but nothing about what it will actually be like. So I will. Society is going to be vicious." Elara's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "You're a woman who left her husband's house to live under the protection of an unmarried duke. Technically, you're his ward, yes, but people will talk. They'll say you're his mistress. They'll say you seduced him to escape Victor. They'll invent stories that make you sound like everything from a fortune hunter to a scarlet woman." Lydia's voice was matter-of-fact. "I need you to be prepared for that." "I see." Elara's hands clenched in her borrowed skirts. "But here's the thing." Lydia turned to face her fully. "Adrian doesn't care what they say. He's a duke. He can weather scandal. And I don't care because I think social conventions are mostly stupid. The question is, can you endure it? Because if you can't, if this is going to break you, we need to find another way." Elara thought of the past year. The whispers, the contempt, the systematic erosion of her dignity. She'd survive that. She could survive this. I can endure it, she said quietly. If it means being free of Victor, I can endure anything. Lydia's smile was fierce. Good. Then let's make them all regret underestimating you. The first test came 3 days later. Adrian had invited his solicitors to Ravenhurst to begin building the annulment case. Elara sat in his study, a massive room lined with books and maps, while two stern-faced men asked her questions about her marriage. And Lord Hale never consummated the union? The elder solicitor, Mr. Blackwood, peered at her over wire-rimmed spectacles. Elara's face burned. No, he made it clear from the beginning that the marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. Did he state this in front of witnesses? He barely spoke to me at all in front of witnesses. I was kept separate from the household. The younger solicitor, Mr. Pierce, made notes with swift efficiency. We'll need testimony from the servants. Someone must have noticed the separate chambers, the lack of interaction. Most of them were loyal to Victor, Elara said bitterly. They won't help me. They will if they're subpoenaed. Adrian spoke from where he stood by the window, his back to the room. And they will be. Your Grace, Mr. Blackwood said carefully, I must advise caution. If we proceed too aggressively, Lord Hale may retaliate. He could spread rumors about Miss Whitmore's character, claim she was unfaithful. Let him try. Adrian turned and his expression was arctic. I have enough evidence of his fraud to destroy him 6 times over. If he wants to play dirty, I'll bury him. Adrian, Elara said quietly, and he looked at her. I appreciate your protection, but I need to do this myself. The room went silent. What do you mean? Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. Elara stood, smoothing her skirts, another of Lydia's dresses, this one a deep sapphire that made her feel like someone worth fighting for. I mean, I want to be involved in every step of this process. I want to review the documents, speak to the witnesses, understand the legal strategy. This is my life you're fighting for. I should have a say in how that fight is waged. Mr. Blackwood looked scandalized. Miss Whitmore, these are complex legal matters. Then explain them to me. I can read, I can understand, and I refuse to be a passive victim in my own rescue. She met Adrian's eyes. You offered me freedom, but freedom means agency, not just a different cage with prettier bars. For a long moment, Adrian studied her. Then slowly he smiled, a real smile, not the polite curve of lips, but something genuine and approving. Gentlemen, he said to his solicitors, it seems Miss Whitmore will be joining our strategy sessions. I suggest you prepare accordingly. Mr. Blackwood sputtered. Mr. Pierce looked intrigued, and Elara felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year, the stirring of her own power. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal documents and strategic planning. Elara absorbed everything like a woman starved for purpose. She learned about contract law and grounds for annulment. She reviewed her father's original agreement with Victor, saw with her own eyes the places where numbers had been altered, dates changed. The rage that knowledge brought was cleansing, but the household staff at Ravenhurst watched her with increasing wariness. She heard the whispers that she was manipulating the Duke, that she'd traded one protector for another, that she was no better than Lady Selene. Mrs. Whitfield remained kind. Lydia remained fiercely loyal, but the other servants kept their distance, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. One afternoon, Elara encountered the head butler, Mr. Graves, in the hallway. He stepped aside to let her pass, but not before she heard him mutter to a footman, "A year from now she'll be gone and we'll still be cleaning up the mess." That night at dinner, she was quieter than usual. Adrian noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked after Lydia had gone to bed. They sat in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. It had become their routine, reviewing the day's progress over tea, planning the next steps. Professional. Proper. Except for the moments when their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. "Your staff thinks I'm using you," Elara said bluntly. "They think I'm another Lady Selene, just better at hiding it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "They're wrong." "Are they?" Elara set down her teacup. "I'm living in your house, wearing your sister's clothes, using your resources to fight my battles. How is that different from dependence? How is that freedom? Because you're not here by force or manipulation. You're here because I offered and you accepted. Adrian leaned forward. And you're not letting me fight your battles. You're learning to fight them yourself. I see you every day growing stronger, sharper. That's not dependence, Elara. That's transformation. The use of her first name sent warmth through her chest. When had they stopped with the formal titles in private? I want to work, she said abruptly. Not just on the annulment. I want to do something useful. Lydia mentioned you have ledgers that need organizing, correspondence that needs managing. Let me help. You're not a servant. I'm not a lady either, not anymore. Elara met his eyes. I'm something in between, and I need to prove to myself, to your staff, to everyone, that I'm more than just a problem that needs solving. Please. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a stack of papers. My estate manager quit last month. The account books are a disaster. If you can make sense of them, the position is yours, with proper wages. I don't need wages, Adrian said firmly. You want independence? Independence requires money of your own. Take the job, Elara. Earn your freedom in every way that matters. She took the ledgers with hands that only trembled slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how terrible the previous manager's handwriting was. He was right. The ledgers were a catastrophe. But over the following week, Elara threw herself into untangling them with fierce determination. She worked in the estate office, a small room adjacent to Adrian's study, organizing accounts and catching discrepancies that had gone unnoticed for months. The work was tedious, sometimes maddening, but it was hers. And slowly, as the staff saw her competence, the whispers began to change. Not completely, there were still those who thought her presence inappropriate. But Mrs. Whitfield began consulting her about household expenses. The stable master asked her opinion on feed costs. She was becoming real to them, not a scandal or a burden, but a person who contributed. Then, 3 weeks after her arrival at Ravenhurst, everything changed. Elara was in the office, deep in calculations, when Lydia burst in without knocking. He's here, she said breathlessly. Victor, at the gates, with constables. The ledger slipped from Elara's fingers. What? He's demanding to speak to Adrian. He has some kind of legal writ. Lydia's face was pale. Elara, what if he can force you to go back? He can't. But Elara's voice shook. The annulment petition has been filed. He can't. Come on. Lydia grabbed her hand. Adrian's in the entrance hall. We need to be there. They arrived to find Adrian facing down 3 men in constables' uniforms, and Victor himself, looking simultaneously furious and triumphant. Your Grace, Victor said with false civility, I apologize for the intrusion, but you're harboring my wife, and I'm here to bring her home. Your wife has filed for annulment based on fraudulent marriage contracts, Adrian replied, his voice dangerously soft. She's under my protection as my legal ward pending the resolution of that petition. About that, Victor produced a document with a flourish. I've obtained a court order requiring Elara's return to my household. The annulment case will proceed, certainly, but until it's resolved, she remains legally my wife and belongs under my roof. Elara felt the floor tilt. That's not possible. It's perfectly possible when one has the right connections. Victor's eyes found hers, and they were full of malice. Did you think I'd simply let you go? That I'd accept this humiliation without a fight? The marriage was fraudulent, Adrian began. Then let the courts decide that. In the meantime, Elara comes home. Victor gestured to the constables. Unless His Grace would like to be charged with kidnapping and interference in a legal marriage. The constables looked uncomfortable but determined. One of them stepped forward. Miss Whitmore, or rather, Lady Hale, I'm afraid Lord Hale's claim has legal standing. You'll need to come with us. No. Elara's voice came out strangled. I won't go back there. Then you'll be forcibly removed. Victor's smile was cruel. Your choice, dear wife. Walk out with dignity, or be dragged out like the ungrateful wretch you are. Adrian moved to stand between Elara and Victor, his whole body taut with barely controlled fury. You're not taking her. I am. Unless you'd like to start a brawl with law enforcement and see how that affects your reputation. Victor's voice dropped to a poisonous whisper. Face it, Blackthorn. You've lost. She's mine, and she stays mine until a court says otherwise. And I have friends in that court, friends who owe me favors. This annulment could take years. Years. The word landed like a death sentence. Elara looked at Adrian's face, saw the helpless rage there, looked at Lydia, whose eyes were bright with tears, looked at the constables, who were just doing their jobs and didn't care about her terror. Then she looked at Victor and saw her future, locked away, punished for her defiance, slowly crushed back into the ghost she'd been. "I'll go," she said quietly. "Elara, no!" Adrian's hand caught her arm. "I'll go," she repeated louder. "But not because you've won, Victor. I'll go because I won't let you destroy Adrian's reputation. I won't let you turn my freedom into his scandal." She pulled away from Adrian gently, meeting his eyes. "Trust me," she whispered. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing my battlefield. Elara, trust me." She walked toward Victor with her head high, every step an act of will. When she reached him, he grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Very wise," he murmured. "You're learning your place again." "No," Elara said softly, so only he could hear. "I'm learning how to fight you in a way you won't see coming. And when I destroy you, Victor, you'll never know what hit you." His grip tightened, but she saw the flash of uncertainty in his eyes. The constables escorted them to Victor's carriage. As Elara climbed inside, she looked back once at Ravenhurst. Adrian stood on the steps, Lydia beside him, both of them looking devastated. But Elara wasn't devastated. She was calculating. Because she'd learned something in her weeks at Ravenhurst, something neither Victor nor the courts could take away. She'd learned that she was done being a victim, and if the law wouldn't free her, she'd find another way, even if it meant burning her entire world down to do it. The carriage ride back to Thornfield felt like descending into a tomb. Victor sat across from Elara in silence, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. The constables rode alongside, their presence a reminder that she'd walked into this cage willingly, or at least that's how the world would see it. But Elara kept her spine straight, her face composed, even as her mind raced through possibilities and discarded them one by one. She had no weapon, no ally, no plan beyond the desperate certainty that she would not, could not, let Victor win. When they arrived at the manor, Celine waited in the entrance hall, draped across a settee like a painting of bored aristocracy. She looked up as Victor hauled Elara through the door and her perfect lips curved into a smile. "Oh, good. You got your little runaway back. How delightfully dramatic." Celine examined her nails. "Should we lock her in the attic this time? Make it properly gothic?" "That won't be necessary." Whilst Victor's grip on Elara's arm was iron. "She's learned her lesson. Haven't you, dear wife?" Elara said nothing. Speech felt dangerous right now, like it might crack the careful control she was maintaining. Victor's eyes narrowed. "I asked you a question." "Yes," Elara said flatly. "I've learned." She'd learned that courts could be bought, that legal protection was meaningless when wealth and connections held more weight than justice, that Adrian's power, formidable as it was, couldn't reach her inside these walls. But she'd also learned something Victor didn't expect. She'd learned how to read ledgers, how to spot financial fraud, how to trace money through complex accounts. And she'd learned it in the office of a duke who'd spent months building a case against the man currently dragging her up the stairs. Victor threw open the door to her old room, the narrow, cheerless chamber she'd occupied for a year. Except now it was worse. The window had been boarded shut, the mirror removed, even the small writing desk was gone. "You'll stay here until the annulment hearing," Victor said. "Mrs. Kalin will bring your meals. You'll speak to no one, see no one. And if you even think about running to your duke again, I'll make sure the entire county knows exactly what kind of woman you are." "What kind is that?" Elara heard herself ask. "The kind who seduces powerful men to escape her obligations. The kind who spreads lies about her husband to cover her own adultery." Victor's smile was poison. "I have witnesses prepared to testify that you and Blackthorn were carrying on long before you left this house, that you manipulated him into offering you refuge. Society will tear you apart, Elara, and him too." The threat was clear. If she fought, Adrian would suffer. His reputation, his sister's prospects, everything he'd built, Victor would destroy it all. "I understand," Elara said quietly. Victor studied her face, searching for defiance. Finding none, he nodded. Good. Perhaps you're finally learning to be an obedient wife. He left, locking the door from the outside. Elara heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, heard Celine's bright laughter as she greeted him, heard the sounds of the household settling into evening routines. Then, alone in the gathering darkness, Elara began to plan. The boarded window was her first problem. Without it, she had no way to mark time, no natural light, no connection to the world outside these four walls. But the boards had been hastily nailed. She could see gaps where weak lamplight filtered through. She waited until the house grew quiet, until she was certain Victor and Celine had retired to their separate, or more likely shared, chambers. Then she began working one of the boards loose, using the edge of the bed frame as leverage. It took hours. Her hands blistered, splinters drove into her palms. But finally, one board came free with a soft crack that sounded deafening in the silence. Moonlight spilled through the gap. Fresh air, cold and sharp, filled her lungs. And through the narrow opening, Elara could see the grounds below, the distant glow of the stable lamps, the iron gates that separated Thornfield from freedom. She couldn't escape through the window. It was 3 stories up, and even if she survived the fall, the gates would be locked and guarded. But she could see. She could think. And in the morning, she could start gathering the one thing Victor had forgotten she now knew how to use. Information. Mrs. Colleen brought breakfast the next morning, her expression carefully neutral. She set down a tray with porridge and weak tea, then turned to leave. Mrs. Kellen, Elara said softly. How long have you worked for Lord Hale? The housekeeper paused. 10 years, miss. Why? Has he always been this cruel, or did it develop over time? Mrs. Kellen's face hardened. His lordship is a fair master to those who serve him loyally. And what about those who don't? Elara gestured to her prison. What about those he decides aren't worth basic human dignity? You made your choice when you ran off to Blackthorn's estate, Mrs. Kellen snapped. Don't expect sympathy now. I'm not expecting sympathy. I'm asking you to remember that cruelty doesn't stay contained. Men who enjoy exercising power over their wives eventually turn that same cruelty on everyone around them. Elara met the woman's eyes. How much does he pay you, Mrs. Kellen? And how many months behind is he on those wages? The housekeeper's face went pale. That's none of your concern. 4 months, Elara said quietly, reading the truth in Mrs. Colleen's expression. He's 4 months behind on the entire household staff's wages, isn't he? I saw the ledgers at Ravenhurst. I know how much debt he's drowning in, and I know he's been lying to all of you about when payment will come. Mrs. Kellen's hands trembled on the breakfast tray. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that Duke Blackthorn offered to erase Victor's debts in exchange for my freedom. I know Victor refused because he cares more about controlling me than about paying the people who keep his household running. Elara stood, moving closer. How long before he starts selling off property to cover his gambling losses? How long before he dismisses half the staff without the wages they're owed? You've worked here 10 years, Mrs. Kellen. What happens to you when Victor decides you're too expensive to keep? The housekeeper's jaw worked. Even if what you say is true, what could I possibly do about it? You could tell me the truth about what happened the night my father died. The breakfast tray clattered to the floor. Mrs. Kellen's face had gone from pale to ashen. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Elara's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. My father didn't die of natural causes, did he? He died 3 days after signing that contract with Victor. 3 days after supposedly borrowing £30,000. But the original contract, the real one, was for $10,000, which means someone changed it after his death, when he couldn't defend himself. You can't prove any of that. Adrian Blackthorn can. He has the original documents, the testimony of the clerks Victor bribed. The only thing we don't have is a witness who was here the night my father died. A witness who might have seen or heard something that would prove Victor's involvement went beyond simple fraud. Mrs. Kellen backed toward the door. I won't testify against his lordship. I won't. Then you'll go down with him when his house of lies collapses. Elara's voice was hard now. Because it will collapse, Mrs. Kellen, with or without your help. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the rubble. The housekeeper fled, leaving the spilled breakfast on the floor. Elara sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. She'd gambled everything on a hunch, on fragments of overheard conversation and suspicious timing. If she was wrong, if Mrs. Kellen went straight to Victor, she'd just made her situation infinitely worse. But if she was right, the day dragged on in suffocating silence. No one came to collect the breakfast tray. No one brought lunch. Elara paced the narrow room, working through scenarios, trying to prepare for whatever came next. Evening fell. The house below erupted in sound, raised voices, breaking glass, Celine's shrill accusations. Elara pressed her ear to the door, catching fragments. Gambling again. Told you we couldn't afford. Blackthorn's lawyers are circling. Victor's response was inaudible, but the fury in his tone was clear. Then footsteps coming fast up the stairs. Multiple people. The key scraped in the lock, and the door burst open. Victor stood there, his face mottled with rage and alcohol. Behind him, two male servants Elara didn't recognize, larger, rougher looking than Thornfield's usual staff. "You've been busy," Victor said, his words slightly slurred. "Filling my servants' heads with lies, poisoning them against me." "I told them the truth," Elara said, backing away. "About the debts, the fraud." "The truth." Victor laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "The truth is that you're a worthless burden I should have tossed in the street the day your father died. But I gave you a home. I gave you my name. And you repaid me by spreading vicious rumors and whoring yourself to a duke. I never Silence." Victor's hand shot out, catching her across the face. The blow sent Elara stumbling against the wall, her vision sparking with stars. "You think I don't know what you and Blackthorn were doing in that estate? You think I'm fool enough to believe you spent weeks there doing nothing but planning legal strategy?" Blood filled Elara's mouth where her lip had split. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Victor gesture to the servants. "Lock her in the cellar. No food, no water, until she learns to keep her mouth shut." "Victor, please." The words came out broken, desperate. She hated the sound of them. "You had your chance to be reasonable." Victor's eyes were cold, dead things. "You chose defiance. Now you'll learn what that cost." The servants grabbed her arms. Elara fought, but they were too strong, dragging her out of the room and down the servants' stairs. The cellar door loomed ahead, thick oak reinforced with iron, the kind of door meant to keep things in, or people. They threw her inside. Elara hit the stone floor hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. The door slammed shut, and she heard the heavy bolt slide home. Darkness. Complete and absolute. The kind of darkness that made you forget what light looked like. Elara curled into herself, tasting blood and fear in equal measure. This was worse than she'd imagined. Worse than the year of quiet cruelty. Worse than being unwanted. This was active punishment designed to break her. She had no idea how long she'd been down there when she heard it. A soft scraping at the door. Elara's heart leaped. Rescue? Or Victor, coming to deliver more punishment? The bolt slid back slowly, carefully. The door cracked open, and lamplight spilled into the darkness. A figure slipped through, small, quick, carrying a basket. Anne, the young maid who'd helped her dress at Ravenhurst. "Miss?" Anne's whisper was terrified. "Miss Whitmore, can you stand?" "Anne?" Elara's voice came out as a croak. "How did you—" "No time. His Grace sent me. I've been in service here for 2 days, pretending to be a new hire." Anne pulled Elara to her feet. "The carriage is waiting at the east gate. Can you walk?" Elara's legs shook, but she nodded. "What about Victor? The guards?" "Mrs. Kellen drugged the guard's wine, and his lordship is passed out drunk in his study. Lady Celine saw to that." Anne pressed the basket into Elara's hands. "Food, water, clean clothes. There's a cloak in there too. We have to go now before the drug wears off." They crept through the cellar, up the servants' stairs, past the kitchen where Mrs. Kellen stood, watch, with an expression of grim determination. The housekeeper pressed a purse into Elara's hands as they passed. "The wages he owed me," she whispered. "I took it from his desk. Consider it payment for testimony. I'll tell the courts everything I know about that night your father died." Elara's throat went tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just survive. And make sure that man pays for what he's done." Outside, the night was cold and clear. Anne led Elara through the gardens, keeping to the shadows. Ahead, Elara could see the east gate standing open, and beyond it, a carriage. Simple, unmarked, but with Adrian Blackthorne himself standing beside it. He saw her and moved forward immediately, catching her as her legs finally gave out. "I have you," he said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice. "You're safe now. I have you." "The constables, the court order." "Withdrawn. I had my lawyers file an emergency petition citing evidence of abuse. The magistrate reviewed the case tonight and granted a temporary injunction removing you from Victor's custody." Adrian's arms were solid, real, the first safe thing Elara had felt in days. "You're not going back there. Ever." Elara wanted to speak, to thank him, to explain her plan that had gone so horribly wrong. But exhaustion and relief and pain all crashed over her at once, and she felt herself sliding into darkness. The last thing she heard was Adrian's voice, tight with fury and fear. "Get Dr. Morrison, now!" She woke in a bed so soft it felt like floating. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, and she could hear birdsong, real birdsong, not the muffled sounds through boarded windows. Ravenhurst. She was back at Ravenhurst. "You're awake," Lydia's voice, tight with relief. "Oh, thank everything. You're awake. Adrian's been pacing for 12 hours like a caged wolf." Elara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her ribs screamed in protest, and her shoulder felt like it was made of broken glass. "Don't move." Lydia pressed her back gently. "You have bruised ribs, a dislocated shoulder, which Dr. Morrison reset while you were unconscious, by the way, and a concussion, plus the split lip and assorted other damage. You're supposed to rest." "How long?" 2 days. "You've been in and out of consciousness." Lydia's eyes were suspiciously bright. "We thought, when Anne brought you out of that cellar, you were so pale, so broken-looking. We thought he might have—" "He didn't kill me," Elara said hoarsely. "Just tried to break me." "He failed." Adrian's voice came from the doorway. He looked haggard, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "You're still here, still fighting." Lydia stood quickly. "I'll go tell Mrs. Whitfield you're awake. She'll want to bring soup and probably cry over you." She squeezed Elara's hand once, then slipped out, leaving them alone. Adrian crossed to the bed slowly, as if afraid she might shatter. "I should have anticipated Victor's move with the court order. I should have protected you better. You couldn't have known." "I should have." His jaw was tight. "When I saw you in that carriage, saw the defeat in your eyes, and then later when Anne's message came, when I realized what he'd done to you—" "Adrian." Elara caught his hand, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "I knew the risk. I chose to go back because I wouldn't let him destroy you to keep me. That was my decision. A decision you shouldn't have had to make." He sank into the chair beside the bed, still holding her hand like a lifeline. "But it's over now. The magistrate is launching a full investigation into Victor's finances and the circumstances of your father's death. Mrs. Kellen's testimony, combined with the evidence I've gathered, is enough to bring charges." "What kind of charges?" "Fraud, forgery, potentially manslaughter, if we can prove his actions contributed to your father's death." Adrian's voice was hard. "He's ruined, Elara. His creditors are circling. His mistress has abandoned him, and the autumn ball is in 3 days." Elara's heart skipped. "The autumn ball. The one where half of society will be watching to see if I'm your mistress or your victim? The one where we're going to show them exactly who you are." Adrian's eyes met hers, intense and burning. "Not a victim. Not a scandal. A woman who survived a monster and came out stronger, if you're well enough to attend." "I'll be well enough." Elara's voice was stronger now. "But Adrian, if I go with you, if I walk into that ballroom on your arm, Victor will see it as a declaration of war." "Good." Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because that's exactly what it is." The 3 days before the ball passed in a blur of preparation and healing. Dr. Morrison visited daily, monitoring Elara's recovery with grim efficiency. Lydia appointed herself chief wardrobe coordinator, insisting that if Elara was going to face down society, she needed armor. "Not literally," Lydia clarified, holding up a gown of deep midnight blue. Though I could probably find you chainmail if you ask nicely, but this is close. It's dramatic without being scandalous, elegant without being apologetic. You'll look like a queen, not a supplicant. Mrs. Whitfield fussed over meals, making sure Elara ate enough to regain her strength. And Adrian was a constant presence, checking on her progress, reviewing legal documents in her sitting room while she rested, talking through strategy for the social warfare ahead. It felt natural having him there, comfortable in a way that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. "Tell me about the ball," Elara said one evening as they sat by the fire. Her ribs hurt less now, and the bruises were fading to yellow and green. "It's the social event of the season. Every family of consequence will be there." Adrian's expression was carefully neutral. "They'll all want to see you, judge you, decide whether you're worthy of sympathy or condemnation." "And Victor?" I sent him an invitation personally. Adrian's smile was cold. "He won't attend, not with his reputation in tatters, but the invitation itself is a message. I'm not hiding you. I'm not ashamed of protecting you, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me directly." Elara studied his face in the firelight. "Why are you doing this? Really? I know what you said about my father, about debts and honor, but this—" She gestured between them. "This is more than repaying a kindness." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "5 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Catherine, beautiful, accomplished, everything society said a duchess should be. But she was cruel when no one was watching, vicious to servants, dismissive of anyone she deemed beneath her. I didn't see it until it was almost too late. I was too focused on duty, on maintaining appearances." He stared into the fire. "When I finally broke the engagement, she tried to destroy me. Spread rumors that I was unstable, violent, that I'd attacked her. It took months to clear my name, and the whole time I kept thinking, if I'd been less powerful, less wealthy, if I hadn't had resources and connections, she would have won. The truth wouldn't have mattered." Elara felt something shift in her chest. "You saw yourself in my situation. I saw what happens when the system protects the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, and I swore I'd never stand by and watch it happen again." Adrian turned to look at her. "But that's not the whole truth either, is it? Because somewhere in the past few weeks, this stopped being about justice or debt or even principle." "Then what is it about?" Elara's voice came out barely above a whisper. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, despite the calloused strength of them. "It's about you, who you are, the way you refused to stay broken, the way you learned accounting just to prove you could contribute, the way you walked back into hell to protect people you barely knew." His thumb traced her jawline. "You're extraordinary, Elara Whitmore. And I think I started falling for you the moment you demanded to be part of your own rescue." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Elara's heart hammered against her healing ribs. "I'm still married," she whispered. "Technically, until the annulment is finalized." "I know. Society already thinks I'm your mistress. I know. If we do this, if there's anything between us, it will make everything harder. The annulment, the court case, your reputation. I know." Adrian's hand cupped her face fully now. "And I don't care. I've spent my life doing the proper thing, the strategic thing, the thing that maintained appearances and protected the family name. Just once, I want to do something because it's true, because it matters, because you matter." Elara's breath caught. "Adrian, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know that when we walk into that ballroom, when I stand beside you in front of everyone who's waiting to judge, I'm not doing it out of obligation or strategy or even justice." His eyes held hers. "I'm doing it because losing you would break something in me I didn't know could break." Later, Elara would wonder what she might have said. What might have happened in that firelit room if the door hadn't burst open, if Anne hadn't stood there with terror written across her face. "Your Grace," the maid gasped. "Miss Whitmore, you need to see this." She held out a newspaper, the evening edition still damp from the press. The headline made Elara's blood run cold. "Duke's Shame, Blackthorn Harbors Adulteress. Exclusive testimony reveals scandalous affair behind annulment. Claim." Below it, a detailed account of Elara and Adrian's relationship, twisted, poisoned, made into something sordid. Quotes from anonymous servants claiming they'd witnessed intimate encounters, dates and times that proved nothing but sounded damning. And worst of all, a statement from Lady Celine Marrow herself, swearing that Elara had confessed the affair to her at Thornfield. "It's all lies," Lydia breathed, reading over Elara's shoulder. "Every word of it. Lies backed by false testimony and circumstantial evidence." Adrian's voice was ice. "Victor's final play. If he can't keep Elara trapped in marriage, he'll destroy both our reputations so thoroughly that the annulment won't matter. We'll both be social pariahs." Elara's hands shook, crinkling the newspaper. "The ball. We can't go now. If we show up together after this, if we don't show up, we admit defeat." Adrian took the paper from her hands. "This is exactly what Victor wants. For us to hide, to look guilty. We go anyway. We face them anyway. And we prove that their gossip and lies have no power over the truth. Adrian, this could ruin you. Then it ruins me." He caught her hands, urgent and fierce. "But I won't abandon you to save my reputation. I won't let him win by default because I was too afraid of scandal. We fight, Elara, together, or we surrender everything we've worked for." Through the window, Elara could see the lights of other estates dotting the hillside. In each of those houses, people were reading that same newspaper, forming opinions, making judgments, deciding that she was exactly what Victor claimed, a scheming adulteress who'd seduced a duke to escape her lawful marriage. The autumn ball was in 2 days. 2 days to prepare for a battlefield where the weapons were whispers and the casualties were reputations. Elara thought of her father, who died with his name destroyed by lies, of her year in hell, silent and powerless, of the cellar's darkness and Victor's cruelty, and every moment she'd been told she was worthless. Then she looked at Adrian, at this man who'd offered her freedom and partnership and something that looked dangerously like love, and made her choice. "We go," she said quietly. "We walk in there together, and we show them exactly who we are. Let them judge. Let them whisper. We'll prove them wrong by surviving." Adrian's expression blazed with something between pride and fierce determination. "Together, then. Together." Neither of them mentioned the other possibility, that walking into that ballroom might be social suicide for them both, that Victor's lies might be too entrenched, too convincing, that sometimes the truth didn't matter when the fiction was more entertaining. But as Elara prepared for bed that night, her body still aching from Victor's violence, her mind still sharp from weeks of legal training, she made herself a promise. She would walk into that ball not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a woman who'd survived hell and refused to apologize for it. And if society wanted to destroy her for that, she'd burn their entire hypocritical world down with her. The morning of the ball dawned cold and merciless, the kind of autumn day where frost clung to the windows like accusations. Elara stood before the mirror in her borrowed chamber, watching Lydia and 2 maids transform her into something she barely recognized. The gown was midnight blue silk that caught the light like deep water, cut to emphasize her shoulders and the graceful line of her neck. The bruises had faded enough that powder could hide them. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement that took Anne nearly an hour to complete. Small diamonds, borrowed from Lydia, glittering among the curls. "You look like a duchess," Lydia said softly, standing behind her. "Not someone's discarded wife. Not a scandal. A duchess." Elara met her own eyes in the mirror. The woman staring back looked stronger than the girl who'd been dragged from this estate in chains 3 weeks ago. Harder, more dangerous. "I look like someone preparing for war," Elara said. "Good." But Lydia's smile was fierce. "Because that's what this is." Downstairs, Adrian waited in the entrance hall, and when he looked up at her descending the stairs, something flashed across his face that made Elara's breath catch. Not just admiration, though that was there. Something deeper, more raw. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly as she reached him. "Once we arrive together, there's no taking it back. Every eye will be on us. Every whisper will cut." "I'm sure." Elara took his offered arm, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his evening coat. "Let them look. Let them whisper. I'm done hiding." The carriage ride to Ashford Hall, where the Marquis of Ashford hosted the autumn ball, passed in tense silence. Through the window, Elara watched other carriages converging on the estate, each one carrying members of society who'd already formed their opinions based on Victor's lies. "What if they won't listen?" Elara asked finally. "What if the truth doesn't matter?" Adrian's hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage. "Then we make them listen. I've spent the past 2 days ensuring certain key people know the real story. The Marchioness of Ashford herself has seen the evidence of Victor's fraud. Lord Chancellor Pembroke reviewed the magistrate's findings. They may not announce it publicly, but they know the truth, and their knowledge will spread." Whispers against whispers. "Exactly." Adrian's thumb traced circles on her palm. "We're not going in defenseless, Elara. We're going in armed with facts, with witnesses, with documented proof. The question is whether society values truth or entertainment more." The carriage slowed, joining the queue of vehicles waiting to deposit their passengers. Ahead, Ashford Hall blazed with light, music spilling from every window. Elara could see the crowds on the steps. Women in gowns that cost more than her father's yearly income. Men in perfectly tailored evening wear, all of them part of a world that had never wanted her. "Last chance," Adrian said softly. "We can turn around. I'll take you back to Ravenhurst, and we'll fight this battle another way." Elara thought about the cellar's darkness, about Victor's fist connecting with her face, about every moment of the past year when she'd been powerless, voiceless, invisible. "No," she said firmly, "we go in." Their carriage pulled up to the entrance. A footman opened the door, and Adrian stepped out first, then turned to hand Elara down. The moment her feet touched the steps, the whispers started. They rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat, shocked, scandalized, gleeful. Elara kept her chin high, her hand steady on Adrian's arm as they climbed the stairs. She could feel hundreds of eyes tracking their progress, could imagine the conversations happening behind fans and gloved hands. That's her, the one who ran off with Blackthorn. Shameless, appearing here together. Has she no decency? The Marquis and Marchioness of Ashford received them at the entrance to the ballroom. Lord Ashford's expression was carefully neutral, but Lady Ashford, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharper eyes, studied Elara with unsettling intensity. "Duke Blackthorn," she said coolly, "and this must be the infamous Miss Whitmore, or should I say Lady Hale?" "Miss Whitmore will suffice," Elara said before Adrian could speak. "The marriage that made me Lady Hale was fraudulent, as the courts are currently determining." Lady Ashford's eyebrows rose. "Bold words. And are you prepared to defend them, young lady? Because there are quite a few people in that ballroom who believe you're nothing more than an adulteress and a liar." "Then they're wrong." Elara met the older woman's gaze steadily. "And I'm prepared to prove it." Something that might have been approval flickered across Lady Ashford's face. "We shall see. Do try not to cause a scene, Duke Blackthorn. I've worked very hard on this event." They entered the ballroom, and the music didn't stop, but it might as well have. Conversations died mid-sentence, dancing couples stumbled. Every face in the room turned toward them with expressions ranging from horrified fascination to outright hostility. Elara had faced many difficult moments in her life, but this was different. This was deliberate exposure, walking into the center of a hostile crowd and daring them to attack. "Breathe," Adrian murmured. "You're doing beautifully." A woman approached, Lady Pembroke, the Lord Chancellor's wife, one of society's most influential arbiters. Her face was pleasant but guarded. "Duke Blackthorn, Miss Whitmore, how unexpected to see you both here." "Is it?" Adrian's tone was mild. "I was invited, and Miss Whitmore is my guest." "Your guest?" Lady Pembroke's eyes swept over Elara's gown, her jewels, the way she stood close to Adrian. "How very modern of you. I wasn't aware dukes had begun bringing their," she paused delicately, "wards to social functions." The word she didn't say hung in the air like smoke. "Mistress." "Miss Whitmore is a victim of fraud and abuse," Adrian said, his voice hardening. "She's under my protection until the courts resolve her case. If that offends sensibilities, perhaps those sensibilities should be directed at the man who forged contracts and imprisoned his wife, rather than the woman who escaped him." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation like moths to flame. Elara recognized several faces from society pages. The Countess of Waverley, Lord and Lady Thornton, the younger Ashford children. All of them watching, judging, waiting to see who would break first. If the marriage was truly fraudulent, Lady Pembroke continued, then Miss Whitmore should have appealed to the courts directly rather than fleeing to another man's estate. The appearance of impropriety saved her life. Adrian's voice cut like a blade. Lord Hale's abuse was escalating. Would you have preferred she wait for him to kill her before seeking help? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lady Pembroke's face flushed. That's a serious accusation, Your Grace. And I have the medical reports to prove it. Adrian produced a folded document from his coat. Dr. Morrison's examination of Miss Whitmore after her return from Thornfield. Bruised ribs, dislocated shoulder, evidence of prolonged malnutrition and imprisonment. Should I read it aloud, or would you prefer to review it privately? Lady Pembroke's hand trembled slightly as she took the paper. Her eyes scanned the contents, and with each line her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to something that looked like shame. I had no idea the situation was so severe. Most people don't. Elara found her voice, surprised by its steadiness. It's easier to believe I'm a scheming woman than to acknowledge that someone like Lord Hale, wealthy, titled, socially connected, could be capable of such cruelty. But comfort doesn't change facts. More people were gathering now, drawn by the drama. Elara saw Victor's allies among them, Lord Grimsby, who'd lent Victor money, Lady Talbot, who'd always found Celine charming. Their faces were hostile, disbelieving. Pretty words, Lord Grimsby said loudly. But words are cheap. Lord Hale tells a very different story, one where his ungrateful wife seduced Duke Blackthorn and used false accusations to cover her adultery. Then let's discuss Lord Hale's story. Adrian's voice was cold steel. Let's discuss how he fraudulently inflated a £10,000 debt to $30,000 after Thomas Whitmore's death. How he used that false debt to coerce Elara into marriage. How he's been embezzling from his own estate to cover gambling losses while lying to his staff about their wages. He gestured, and suddenly Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Pierce were there, carrying portfolios stuffed with documents. They began distributing copies to the crowd, original contracts, altered ledgers, bank statements, testimony transcripts. Everything is documented, Adrian continued. The fraud, the forgery, the abuse. It's all there for anyone who cares about truth more than gossip. Lord Grimsby's face went purple. This is outrageous. You can't just... I can, and I am. Adrian's eyes swept the crowd. For too long, society has protected men like Victor Hale because exposing them would be uncomfortable, because it's easier to blame the woman than acknowledge the monster. But I'm done with comfort. I'm done with propriety that shields abusers. If that makes me scandalous, so be it. The ballroom had gone utterly silent. Elara watched faces change as people read the documents, watched skepticism shift to shock, hostility fade into uncomfortable recognition. Not everyone, of course. Some crumpled the papers and turned away, unwilling to abandon their prejudices. But others... Lady Pembroke looked up from the medical report, her eyes finding Elara's. My dear child, I owe you an apology. We all do. You owe me nothing, Elara said quietly, but you owe it to every other woman trapped in a similar situation to listen when they cry for help, to believe them when they speak truth, to value their lives over social comfort. A new voice cut through the silence, older, male, carrying absolute authority. Well said, Miss Whitmore. The crowd parted for Lord Chancellor Pembroke himself, Lady Ashford at his side. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that shaped the kingdom. I've reviewed the evidence Duke Blackthorn compiled, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. The magistrate's findings are sound. Lord Hale will face charges of fraud, forgery, and criminal abuse. The annulment petition has been approved and will be finalized within the week. The words landed like thunderclaps. Within the week. Elara felt her knees go weak with relief so profound it was almost painful. Furthermore, Lord Pembroke continued, I want it known that Miss Whitmore's actions were entirely appropriate given the circumstances. She sought refuge from a legitimate threat. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either ignorant of the facts or willfully blind to injustice. He turned to face the crowd, and his expression was severe. We like to think ourselves civilized, but civilization is measured by how we treat the vulnerable, not how well we maintain appearances. Miss Whitmore deserves our respect, not our censure. I hope this assembly remembers that. The silence that followed was different from before, thoughtful rather than hostile, contemplative rather than gleeful. Elara saw people looking at her with new eyes, reassessing, reconsidering. Lady Ashford stepped forward, and to Elara's shock, she curtsied. A small gesture, but coming from a marchioness to a woman of no rank, it was profound. I judged you unfairly at the door, Miss Whitmore. I apologize. Her smile was thin but genuine. Would you do me the honor of the first dance? I think it's time society saw you as you truly are, a survivor, not a scandal. Elara's throat went tight. She glanced at Adrian, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Lady Ashford. I would be honored, my lady. They moved onto the dance floor together, and slowly, cautiously, other couples joined them. The music swelled, a waltz, elegant and formal, and Elara let herself be guided through the steps, hyper-aware of every eye still watching but no longer caring quite so much. You've caused quite the disruption, Lady Ashford said as they turned. Half the people here are outraged, and the other half are impressed. Do you know which is more valuable? The half who are impressed, Elara guessed. Wrong, the half who are outraged. Lady Ashford's smile sharpened. Those are the ones who've been forced to confront their own complicity in systems that protect men like Victor Hale. Their discomfort is the beginning of change. When the dance ended, Elara found herself surrounded by people who'd been her enemies moments before. Some apologized. Others asked questions about the legal process, about resources for women in similar situations. A few still looked skeptical, but they were outnumbered now by those willing to listen. Lady Pembroke approached again, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine concern. My husband mentioned you've been managing Duke Blackthorn's estate accounts. Is that true? Yes, my lady. I've been serving as his estate manager. Remarkable. I sit on the board of the Merchants Guild Charity Foundation. We're always looking for competent administrators, people who understand finances and aren't afraid of hard work. Would you be interested in a position once your legal matters are settled? Elara's heart leaped. A real position, independent income, the kind of future she'd thought was impossible. I would be very interested, my lady. Excellent. We'll discuss terms later. For now, Lady Pembroke leaned in conspiratorially. Enjoy your victory. It's not every day a woman outmaneuvers the system this spectacularly. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted from hostile to curious to almost celebratory. People who'd read the evidence couldn't unsee it. The story was spreading, not the scandalous fiction Victor had created, but the truth about fraud and abuse, and a woman brave enough to fight back. Elara danced with Lord Pembroke, who asked her surprisingly astute questions about estate management. With young Lord Thornton, who apologized for believing the rumors. With the Marquis of Ashford himself, who told her she had more courage than half the men in Parliament. And finally, as midnight approached, with Adrian. You did it, he said softly as they waltzed. You walked in here expecting to be destroyed, and instead you changed the narrative entirely. We did it, Elara corrected. I couldn't have survived this without you. You would have found a way. You always do. Adrian's hand tightened on her waist, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Elara, when the annulment is finalized, when you're free... He never got to finish the sentence. The ballroom doors burst open, and Victor Hale stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed, Celine clutching his arm. The crowd gasped, conversations dying mid-word. Victor's gaze swept the room until it found Elara. Then his face twisted with rage so pure it was almost inhuman. You! He snarled, starting across the ballroom. People scattered out of his path. You've destroyed everything. My reputation, my finances, your ability to abuse people without consequences. Elara stepped away from Adrian, facing Victor directly. Her voice rang clear across the silent room. Yes, I did that, and I'd do it again. You ungrateful wretch! Victor was close now, close enough that Elara could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the wildness in his eyes. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing but suffering, and now everyone knows it. Victor's hand shot out, reaching for her throat. But before he could make contact, Adrian was there, catching Victor's wrist with enough force to make the older man cry out. "Touch her," Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. "And I will break every bone in your hand." Security guards materialized. Lord Ashford had clearly prepared for this possibility. They grabbed Victor's arms, pulling him away from Elara. Celine stood frozen, her beautiful face pale with horror as she realized every eye in the room was on them. "Lord Hale," Lord Pembroke said coldly, "you are no longer welcome in polite society. These gentlemen will escort you from the premises. If you attempt to contact Miss Whitmore again, I will personally ensure criminal charges are filed for harassment and attempted assault." Victor struggled against the guards, his face purple with impotent rage. "This isn't over. You hear me, Elara? This isn't—" "Yes, it is." Elara's voice cut through his shouting like a knife. "It's over, Victor. You've lost. Your lies are exposed. Your fraud is documented. Your abuse is known. And nothing you say or do will ever give you power over me again." She turned her back on him, the ultimate dismissal, and walked back to where Adrian stood. Behind her, she heard the guards dragging Victor away, heard Celine's tearful pleas that she'd known nothing, been manipulated herself. The ballroom remained silent for a heartbeat. Then two. Then Lady Ashford began to clap. The sound was shocking in the silence. But then Lady Pembroke joined her. Then Lord Pembroke. Then the Marquis himself. And suddenly the entire ballroom erupted in applause, not the polite, restrained applause of social obligation, but genuine, thunderous approval. Elara stood in the center of it, Adrian's hand finding hers, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking, blooming. For the first time in over a year, she felt seen, valued, believed. "Come on," Adrian murmured in her ear. "Let's get some air." They slipped out onto a terrace overlooking the gardens, leaving the noise and celebration behind. The night air was cold and clean, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "That was—" Elara started, then stopped, unable to find words. "Terrifying? Exhilarating? Completely insane?" Adrian suggested. "All of those." Elara laughed, and it felt strange after so much tension. "I thought I was prepared for how bad it might be. I never imagined it could turn around so completely." "Truth has power," Adrian said quietly, "when people actually listen to it. And you made them listen, not by pleading or begging, but by refusing to apologize for surviving." Elara turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, he looked younger, the harsh lines of tension smoothed from his face. "What you said earlier, before Victor arrived. What were you going to ask me?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "I was going to ask if you'd consider staying at Ravenhurst, not as a ward or a guest or an employee, as—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "As someone who belongs there, who might want to build a future there." Elara's heart was pounding. "Adrian, I'm not free yet. The annulment isn't final for another week, and even then society will talk. I know, but I don't care about their talk, Elara. I care about you. About what we might have if we're brave enough to reach for it." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night air. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that this, whatever this is between us, might be worth exploring once you're truly free." Elara looked up at him, at this man who'd rescued her and believed in her and stood beside her when the world wanted to tear her apart. She thought about Ravenhurst, about Lydia's fierce friendship and Mrs. Whitfield's kindness and the estate office where she'd discovered her own competence. She thought about a future where she wasn't defined by Victor's cruelty or her father's death or society's judgment. A future she could build on her own terms. "I'll consider it," she said softly. "More than consider it. When the annulment is final, when I'm legally free, ask me again." Adrian's smile was slow and genuine and filled with something that looked dangerously like hope. "That's a promise, then." "It's a promise." Behind them, the ballroom doors opened and Lydia stepped out. "There you are. You're missing the most delicious aftermath. Half the room is arguing about whether you're scandalous or heroic, and Lady Talbot just fainted when someone showed her the bank statements proving Victor owes her husband £20,000. She bounced over, linking her arm through Elara's. Also, 3 different matrons have asked me if you're available for tea this week, which I'm pretty sure means you've officially been accepted into society. Well, most of society. The interesting parts, anyway. Elara laughed again, and this time it felt easier. Natural. Tea sounds terrifying. It will be, but you'll be brilliant at it. Lydia squeezed her arm. You were brilliant tonight, Elara. Truly. Even I underestimated how spectacular your triumph would be. They stayed on the terrace a while longer, the 3 of them, watching the stars and listening to music drift from the ballroom. Inside, the party continued, but it was different now. The whispers were still there, but they'd changed from malicious to amazed, from condemning to congratulatory. Elara had walked into that ballroom expecting to be destroyed. Instead, she'd won something far more valuable than social acceptance. She'd won her voice, her power, her right to exist as herself, unapologetic and unbroken. And as the carriage carried them back to Ravenhurst in the early hours of morning, Elara allowed herself to imagine something she'd thought impossible. A future. Not just freedom from Victor, but freedom for something. For work she found meaningful. For friendships that sustained her. For love, if she was brave enough to believe in it. The annulment would be final in a week. And when it was, when she was legally and completely free, she would have choices. Real choices, made by a woman who'd survived hell and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, Elara knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never be powerless again. The week that followed, the ball passed in a strange suspension between worlds. Elara was no longer Victor's prisoner, but not yet legally free. Not yet able to claim the future stretching before her like an open road. She spent her days in the estate office, drowning herself in ledgers and correspondence, anything to keep her mind from counting down the hours. Mrs. Whitfield brought tea at regular intervals. Lydia invaded periodically with updates from society. Who was defending Elara, who was still skeptical, who'd been cut entirely from guest lists for supporting Victor. And Adrian was there, always. Not hovering, but present. Working in his study while she organized accounts in the adjacent office. Reviewing legal documents while she calculated feed costs and staff wages. Their proximity felt natural now, comfortable in a way that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. On the 3rd day, a letter arrived. Elara recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope and felt her hand start shaking before she even broke the seal. She hadn't heard from her family since the wedding. Victor had intercepted any correspondence, claimed they wanted nothing to do with her. Another lie in a constellation of them. My dearest Elara, Lord Pembroke's wife wrote to tell me everything. What Victor did to your father, to you, to our entire family. I cannot express the shame and horror I feel knowing I delivered you to that monster, believing his lies about debts that never existed. We've been searching for you. When you disappeared from Thornfield, Victor told us you'd run away with a lover, that you'd abandoned your marriage in disgrace. We believed him because we were fools, because it was easier than confronting what he truly was. Your brothers want to come for you. Marcus speaks of calling Victor out, of demanding satisfaction for what he did. I've forbidden it. More violence will solve nothing, and you've already won the battle that matters. The magistrate came to our home yesterday. He showed us the evidence, explained the annulment process, told us you're safe with Duke Blackthorn. Elara, my brave girl, you survived something I cannot fully comprehend, and I am so desperately proud of you. When you're ready, when the legal matters are settled, please come home. Or if Ravenhurst has become your home now, please let us visit. We have so much to repair, so many apologies to make. Your loving mother Elara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Adrian found her like that, sitting at her desk with ink-stained hands and a face wet with something between grief and relief. Elara? He was at her side immediately. What's wrong? She handed him the letter wordlessly, watched his face as he read, saw anger flash across his features at the mention of Victor's lies, then soften at her mother's words. They believed him, Elara said, her voice breaking. All this time they thought I'd abandoned them, that I was exactly what Victor claimed, ungrateful, unfaithful, selfish. But now they know the truth. Adrian knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers. Your mother is proud of you, Elara. Your family wants you back. I don't know if I can face them. Not yet. The shame of it, being so completely fooled, being so powerless for so long, is Victor's shame, not yours. Adrian's voice was firm. You were 17 years old and trapped by a system designed to protect men like him. The fact that you survived, that you fought back, that you won, that's not shameful, Elara. That's extraordinary. She looked at him through tears, this man who'd seen her at her weakest and somehow still thought her strong. When did you become so wise? When I met a woman who refused to stay broken. His thumb brushed away her tears. Write to your mother. Tell her you need time, but that you forgive her, because holding on to that pain will only poison what you've built. Elara did write that same afternoon, a short letter promising to visit once the annulment was final, assuring her mother that she understood, that she was healing. It felt strange, offering forgiveness for something that had hurt so deeply. But Adrian was right. She'd spent too long carrying Victor's poison. She wouldn't let it corrupt the future she was building. The annulment hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Elara woke that morning to gray skies and rain, the kind of weather that matched the knot of anxiety in her stomach. You don't have to attend, Adrian said over breakfast. The lawyers can handle everything. No. Elara set down her teacup with deliberate care. I need to be there. I need to see it end officially. Lydia squeezed her hand across the table. Then we'll all be there with you. The courthouse was a stern building of gray stone, its halls echoing with footsteps and whispered conversations. Elara walked between Adrian and Lydia, Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Pierce flanking them with portfolios of evidence. Inside the courtroom, she saw Victor for the first time since the ball. He looked diminished somehow, his expensive coat worn at the edges, his face haggard, eyes darting nervously. Celine was conspicuously absent. Apparently love faded quickly when the money ran out. The judge was an elderly man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for impatience with fraudsters. He reviewed the evidence with meticulous care, the original contract, the altered version, bank statements, Mrs. Kellen's testimony, Dr. Morrison's medical report. Then he looked up at Victor, and his expression was colder than the rain outside. Lord Hale, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Not only did you fraudulently inflate a legitimate debt, but you used that fraud to coerce a young woman into marriage, then subjected her to sustained abuse and imprisonment. Victor's lawyer started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. I'm granting the annulment petition. The marriage between Victor Hale and Elara Whitmore is hereby declared null and void, as if it never existed. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay restitution to the Whitmore family in the amount of £15,000, the difference between the legitimate debt and the fraudulent one, plus damages. Your Honor, my client doesn't have, the lawyer began. Then he can sell property to cover it. I don't particularly care how he manages it. The judge's gavel came down with finality. This case is closed. Miss Whitmore, you are free. The words hung in the air like bells. Free. Legally, officially, completely free. Elara felt Adrian's hand find hers under the table, felt Lydia's arm slip around her shoulders. She wanted to cry, to laugh, to scream with relief. Instead, she sat very still, letting the reality of it wash over her. She was Elara Whitmore again. Not Lady Hale, not a wife, not a prisoner, just herself. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't justice, he spat. She manipulated the court, turned everyone against me with her lies. The only liar in this courtroom is you, Lord Hale. The judge's voice was ice. And if you continue disrupting these proceedings, I'll add contempt of court to the charges you're already facing. Sit down. Victor sat, but his eyes found Elara's across the room. There was such hatred in them, such impotent rage, that for a moment she felt a flicker of the old fear. Then it passed. Because hatred from a powerless man was just noise, and Victor had no power over her anymore. They left the courthouse into rain that felt like blessing, washing away the last traces of a marriage that should never have existed. Reporters had gathered on the steps. Word of the case had spread. but Adrian's guards kept them at bay while the carriage pulled up. "Miss Whitmore, is it true Duke Blackthorn paid for your legal defense? Are you returning to your family or staying at Ravenhurst? What do you say to critics who claim you manipulated the courts?" Elara paused at the carriage door. Adrian's hand was on her elbow, ready to help her inside, but something made her turn back to face the reporters. "I say that the truth doesn't need manipulation," she called out, her voice carrying over the rain. "I say that every woman trapped in an abusive situation deserves to be heard and believed. I say that I'm grateful to live in a society where justice is possible, even if it requires fighting for it. And I say that I'm done answering questions about my past. From this moment forward, I'm looking only toward my future." She climbed into the carriage, Adrian and Lydia following. As they pulled away, Elara looked back at the courthouse one last time, at the building where her chains had been legally severed. "Well," Lydia said, breaking the silence, "that was satisfying. Did you see Victor's face when the judge ordered restitution? I thought he might actually combust." "Lydia," Adrian said warningly. "What? I'm allowed to enjoy watching bad people face consequences." Lydia turned to Elara. "So, you're officially free. What happens now?" It was the question Elara had been avoiding thinking about too carefully. Freedom was one thing. Knowing what to do with it was another. "Now," she said slowly, "I visit my family, make peace with my mother and brothers. Then," she looked at Adrian, found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Then I suppose I figure out what kind of life I want to build." "And Lady Pembroke's job offer?" Lydia prompted. "Managing the charity foundation?" "I haven't decided yet." Elara twisted her hands in her lap. "It's a good opportunity, but it would mean moving to London, and I'm not sure I'm ready for city life after everything." "There are other options," Adrian said quietly, "if you want them." The air in the carriage suddenly felt charged with possibility. Lydia looked between them, then made an exaggerated show of checking her pocket watch. "Oh, look at that. We're nearly home, and I just remembered I promised Mrs. Whitfield I'd help her with the dinner menu. Excuse me while I go jump out of a moving carriage to give you two some privacy." "The carriage is still moving, Lydia." "I'm aware. It's called dramatic timing, Adrian. Look it up." Despite everything, Elara laughed. And when the carriage pulled up to Ravenhurst and Lydia disappeared into the house with suspicious speed, Elara found herself alone with Adrian in the entrance hall, rain drumming on the windows above. "Walk with me?" Adrian offered his arm. They wandered through the portrait gallery, past generations of blackthorns staring down from painted frames. Elara had walked this hall dozens of times over the past months, but today it felt different. Today she wasn't a guest or a ward or a woman waiting for freedom. Today she was simply herself, standing beside a man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen to stay anyway. "You remember what I asked you?" Adrian said as they stopped before a window overlooking the gardens. "The night of the ball before Victor interrupted us? You asked me to consider staying at Ravenhurst, to think about building a future here." Elara's pulse was racing. "You said to ask you again when the annulment was final. I'm asking now." Adrian turned to face her fully, and there was vulnerability in his expression that made her chest ache. "Not as a ward or an employee or even a friend. Elara Whitmore, I'm asking if you'd consider staying here as my equal, my partner. Eventually, if you'll have me, my wife." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and promise, and all the things they'd been circling around for months. "I'm not society's idea of a proper duchess," Elara said softly. "I'm damaged goods in their eyes. A scandal. Your reputation would survive marrying me, but it would never be the same." "I don't care about my reputation." Adrian's hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their strength. "I care about spending my life with someone who challenges me, who makes me better, who survived hell and came out unbroken. I care about you, Elara, not who you were supposed to be or who society thinks you should be. You, exactly as you are." Elara felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were different. Not grief or relief or fear, something warmer, something that felt dangerously like joy. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "of trusting this, of believing it could work, of losing everything again if it falls apart." I'm terrified too. Adrian's thumb brushed her cheekbone. I'm terrified I'll disappoint you, or fail to protect you, or somehow prove myself unworthy of what you've survived to be here. But I'm more terrified of letting fear keep me from the best thing that's ever happened to me. Adrian, you don't have to answer now. Take time. Visit your family. Consider Lady Pembroke's offer. Explore every option available to you. I just need you to know that whatever you decide, wherever you go, you'll always have a home here. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting. Elara looked up at him, at this man who'd rescued her and believed in her and loved her enough to give her space to choose freely. She thought about the girl she'd been at 17, powerless, voiceless, trapped, and the woman she'd become, scarred but strong, damaged but not broken, free in ways that had nothing to do with legal documents. She'd spent so long fighting for freedom. Maybe it was time to fight for something more. Ask me properly, she said. Adrian's eyes widened. Elara, ask me. Not eventually or someday. Now. Ask me now. Slowly, deliberately, Adrian sank to one knee in the portrait gallery, surrounded by generations of his ancestors. His hands caught hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Elara Whitmore, you're the bravest person I've ever known. You've made me question everything I thought I understood about strength and honor and what it means to truly protect someone. I can't promise I'll always get it right or that life with me will be easy, but I can promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me? Elara looked down at him, this powerful duke on his knees before a woman society had tried to destroy, and felt something inside her chest settle into place. Not healing, exactly. Some wounds never fully healed. But acceptance. Peace. The knowledge that she could carry her scars and still build something beautiful. Yes, she said, and her voice was steady, sure, stronger than she'd ever heard it. Yes, I'll marry you. Adrian surged to his feet, catching her in an embrace that lifted her off the ground. And when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative or careful or worried about propriety. It was fierce and real and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Lydia's voice echoed from somewhere in the house. Finally! I've been listening through 3 different doors and was about to come drag you both to the chapel myself. Adrian laughed, his forehead pressed against Elara's. My sister has no concept of privacy. Your sister is a force of nature, Elara smiled. When should we tell her properly? I suspect she already knows, but Adrian pulled back slightly, suddenly serious. There's something I need to give you first. He led her to his study, to a safe hidden behind a painting of Ravenhurst in winter. Inside was a small wooden box, worn with age. Adrian opened it to reveal a ring, gold set with sapphires and diamonds, clearly an heirloom. This was my grandmother's, he said quietly. She was the only one who stood up to my father when he was being cruel. The only one who taught me that power should be used to protect, not dominate. I think she would have liked you very much. He slipped the ring onto Elara's finger, and it fit perfectly. She stared at it, this symbol of promises and futures and possibilities she'd thought lost forever. We should visit your family, Adrian said, before we make any announcements. They deserve to hear it from you first. So the next morning, they traveled to the Whitmore family home, a modest house on the outskirts of town, nothing like the estates Elara had lived in for the past year, but somehow more welcoming because of it. Her mother answered the door herself, no servants, no pretension, and when she saw Elara, she burst into tears. My baby, my girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. Elara let herself be pulled into an embrace that smelled like lavender and home. It's not your fault, Mama. Victor lied to everyone. Her brothers appeared, Marcus, tall and serious, and James, younger and visibly angry. They both looked at Adrian with suspicion until Elara made introductions. This is Duke Adrian Blackthorne. He's the reason I'm free. And she took a breath. He's asked me to marry him. I said yes. The silence that followed was profound. Then Marcus's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in years. You're sure? After everything, you're sure you want to marry again? I'm sure. Elara looked at Adrian, found him watching her with an expression that made her certain. This is different. This is my choice. Her mother was crying again, but this time with joy. Then you have our blessing, my darling, all our blessings. They stayed for dinner, cramped around the family table like old times. Her brothers grilled Adrian mercilessly about his intentions, his finances, his ability to protect Elara. Adrian bore it with good humor, answering every question honestly. As the evening wore on, Elara found herself in the kitchen with her mother, washing dishes like they used to before everything fell apart. "He loves you," her mother said quietly. "I can see it in how he looks at you. Like you're the only real thing in the room." "I love him too." The words felt strange but true. "I didn't expect to. After Victor, I thought I'd never trust anyone enough for love. But Adrian, he gave me space to heal, to find my own strength. He didn't try to rescue me. He taught me how to rescue myself." Her mother set down the dish she was drying, her eyes bright with tears. "Your father would be so proud of you, Elara, for surviving, for fighting back, for finding happiness despite everything that monster tried to take from you." "I wish he could be here," Elara whispered, "to walk me down the aisle, to know that his death wasn't in vain, that exposing Victor's fraud cleared his name too." "He knows, sweetheart. Wherever he is, he knows." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Ravenhurst's private chapel, small and intimate, with only family and close friends in attendance. Elara wore ivory silk and her grandmother's pearls, simple and elegant. Adrian wore blackthorn blue, and when he saw her walking down the aisle on Marcus's arm, his expression made her breath catch. Lady Pembroke attended, along with Lord and Lady Ashford. Mrs. Kellen sat in the back pew, having left Victor's employment and found work with a family that valued loyalty over cruelty. Even Anne was there, wearing her best dress and crying openly. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional. But when Adrian slipped a second ring onto Elara's finger, a wedding band to match the sapphire engagement ring, she felt the weight of the past finally lift. She was no longer the bride no one wanted. She was the woman who'd survived the unsurvivable and built something beautiful from the ashes. At the reception, Lydia gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Lord Pembroke spoke about justice and courage and changing systems from within. And Elara's mother thanked Adrian for seeing worth in her daughter when society saw only scandal. Late in the evening, Elara and Adrian slipped away from the celebration, walking through Ravenhurst's gardens as stars emerged overhead. "Do you remember the first day I came here?" Elara asked. "How terrified I was. How certain this was just another cage with prettier bars. I remember thinking you looked like you might bolt at any moment." Adrian's arm was warm around her waist. "And I remember deciding that if I could just give you space to breathe, you'd figure out how extraordinary you were on your own." "Did I?" "You exceeded every expectation." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Elara Blackthorne, Duchess of Ravenhurst, you've turned my entire life upside down. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it." Elara rose on her toes to kiss him, and it felt like coming home. Not the home she'd lost when her father died, or the prison Victor had made. A new home, built on choice and partnership and love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "What happens now?" she asked against his lips. "Now we live." Adrian's smile was soft, genuine, full of promise. "We work, we laugh, we survive whatever comes next together. And someday, when your daughter asks how we met, you can tell her the truth. Which is that her father once paid an old debt, and somewhere along the way, 2 broken lives turned into one unstoppable future." Years later, that's exactly what Elara told their daughter, a bright-eyed girl with her mother's determination and her father's strategic mind. She told her about fraud and courage and surviving systems designed to crush you, about finding your own power when the world tried to take it away. But mostly, she told her about choosing to build something beautiful after everything had been destroyed, about refusing to let cruelty define you, about the strength it takes to heal, to trust, to love again after betrayal. And when her daughter asked if the story had a happy ending, Elara looked around at the life she'd built, at Adrian reading in his study, at Lydia arguing passionately about women's rights in Parliament, at the foundation she now ran helping other women escape abusive marriages, and smiled. "It has a true ending," she said, "which is better than happy, because true endings acknowledge the scars while celebrating the survival. And I survived, my darling. We all did. The girl who'd been sold to settle a dead man's fraudulent debt had become a woman who changed laws, shifted social consciousness, and proved that broken things could be mended into something stronger than they'd ever been whole. Victor Hale died 3 years after the annulment, penniless and alone, his title stripped for fraud. Elara attended the funeral because closure mattered, but she felt nothing looking at his grave except relief that he could hurt no one else ever again. Celine married a merchant and disappeared into comfortable obscurity. Mrs. Kellen became Ravenhurst's head housekeeper, loyal and fierce in protecting the household. And Anne rose through the staff to become Elara's personal secretary, helping run the foundation that had saved over 200 women by the time Elara turned 30. But those were epilogues. Footnotes to a story that mattered because it was true, not in the literal sense of historical fact, but in the deeper truth of human survival and transformation. On the 10th anniversary of her wedding, Elara stood at the same window where she'd first looked out at Ravenhurst grounds, feeling like a prisoner in a different cage. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The fight it took to get here? The scars that never quite faded?" Elara thought about the girl she'd been, terrified, powerless, convinced she'd never matter to anyone, and the woman she'd become, scarred but strong, loved but independent, free in every way that counted. "Not for a second," she said, "because every scar is proof I survived, and surviving was worth everything." Below them, their children played in the gardens, 3 of them now, loud and wild and certain the world belonged to them because their mother had fought to make it safer. Above them, stars wheeled through endless sky, indifferent to human suffering but somehow present for human triumph. And Elara Blackthorne, once the bride no one wanted, now the duchess who'd changed a kingdom, smiled at the life she'd built from ruins and ruins transformed into foundation. She had been broken. She had been lost. She had been declared worthless by a world that valued compliance over courage. But she had survived. And in surviving, she had won. Not just freedom, though that mattered. Not just love, though that sustained her. But something more fundamental. The unshakable knowledge that she was enough, exactly as she was, scars and all. And that knowledge, once earned, could never be taken away.